Big topics, big ideas, and practical policy solutions. This is Leaders on the Frontier with your host, David Lease.
Well, hi, everybody. It's August 22nd, 2024, and my name is David Lease, and I'm your proud host of Leaders on the Frontier. A warm welcome to everybody, regardless of where you're joining us from. And we so much appreciate the audience's participation. And this is a topic that we're going to be talking about urban planning, including the city of Winnipeg and its nearby communities in that incredible region in Manitoba and Canada. And this is quite a case study. So one of the things I wanted to ask is, before we get into that larger discussion with our special guest, is really about what's going on in the news today. I believe that the railway strike is underway, if my information is correct. And it's a real shame because that will certainly have a huge impact on our economy. And so we hope that the federal government will help facilitate, or both sides will come together to an agreement to avert that. We have a situation where, in Canada, we have a very large country, as you know, and our economy, our livelihoods, our way of life depend on free and clear transportation, including the rail. So this is going to impact, every sector of the economy, whether it's grain shipping from coast to coast, whether it's the supply of important ingredients to get to, every community as they treat water, for safe drinking. I mean, this has got big impacts. In fact, I want to highlight a website, and you might find it very important to look at. It's called stopthestrike.ca. And there was a countdown on that site, but it kind of summarizes really well the impact that this kind of labor disruption could make in terms of our economy. Again, that's called stopthestrike.ca. And there's, in fact, a calculator now that's underway, and it kind of is pretty humbling because it just shows every day the tens of millions of dollars of impacts on our economy and ultimately on people. And to me, it's really quite a significant disruption, because it begs the question, how do we get things done in this country so that we don't have this kind of labor disruption? Do we have a situation where the federal government needs to mandate arbitration, bring those parties to the table? What do you think? What's your take on this? Are you concerned about this strike? Is it going to impact you and your life? Maybe you have an opinion. We'd love to hear from that. So, to me, it's always one of those questions. You want an economy that's working well. It is about our way of life, but it's going to have massive impacts the longer that continues. So let's hope that sides come together, because again, it's all related to economic disruption. You think of getting all kinds of major projects done in this country. You think of building of pipelines as an example. Gosh, if you can't do that, then that says everything about our future prosperity and the future for our next generation. It's interesting. I don't know if you've noticed this, but in the week this news, we had Stats Canada came out, and they confirmed what we all kind of know, many of us, that families' after-tax income slid in 2022. So Stats Canada says the median family after-tax income in 2022 fell compared with 2021, after adjusted for inflation, with young people being the hardest hit. So, not good news, but not a surprise. And the agency says the median family after-tax income of Canadians was $60,000 in 2022, up 2.5% from 2021. So if you adjust that after inflation, you can see why our incomes actually slid. So this is a big deal when you have an annual inflation rate of 6.8%. And we know all inflation, it doesn't come from you, the consumer or the producer. It comes from having too much money circulating and chasing too few goods. So that's what's driving inflation, and thanks to government spenders. So anyway, so that's part of the perspective that we're in, and it really impacts people because your way of life then is less affordable and in jeopardy. And we also found out this week that, and we always like to pick on the CBC appropriately, but our Canadian Broadcasting Corporation paid out some $18 million in bonuses this year. What do you think about that? Again, another use of money from a corporation that already gets well over $1 billion in subsidy. So we're so glad that you could join us for these important discussions, and we urge you to share it with your network of people. And today is no exception. We're going to be talking about a planning process and a plan. It's called the Winnipeg Metropolitan Region Plan. It's called Securing Our Future for the 2050 time zone. It's amazing that they're looking so far ahead. So what do you think about this? There's certainly been an awful lot of reaction and discussion regarding this plan. And we all know that we need to plan, but what are appropriate plans? And what makes for a good plan? And we want to look at this plan. I encourage you to look at the website, and we'll go through some of the highlights of this. And so I wanted to mention that this plan has gone through a number of years of evolution. There's quite a history going back, I believe, to at least 2020. And so every year there's been kind of an evolution of that plan. So that's an important part of the history, part of which is encapsulated in that document. And you can find it on their website. And I encourage you to take the time to look at that website. There's nothing like researching the documents and trying to discern what's going on. So it's in that spirit of fair play that we want to be able to become better informed and look at this. So I want to highlight that this topic is being discussed today because it's a very important public policy issue that affects you. Why does it affect you? Because all these things impact our livability of our communities, whether it's in Winnipeg, whether it's in Brandon, Manitoba, whether it's in Edmonton or Vancouver, right across the country. These plans have a huge impact on our ability, our economy to function, but to live our lives and to be able to preserve those choices that make our lives unique as individuals. So we kind of all agree on that, but where's the arguments here? Where's the rub? So what's kind of amazing is that this particular plan that we're focusing in on as a bit of a case study has really been going through a number of consultations, and even in the dead of summer, namely this month in August, we had two very interesting meetings. One was in Winnipeg, and you can see that online, and a second one was held the other week in Niverville. And this is what happened in Niverville. There was quite a crowd.
And they can't allow them in the room because it'll be way over capacity. So that's the issue. I'm not here to make excuses for them. I don't know them. I just wrote a column with them that some of them probably didn't like and some of these people did like. But the point is that in about 40 days, 45 days time, they made a commitment out loud in public to schedule meetings in a building that's big enough to accommodate everybody in there and everybody out here. Okay?
So as you can see from that clip, it's really quite incredible that hundreds of people showed up. I'm not exactly sure on the number. Some have said 300, some have said even more, but suffice it to say there was a energized group of citizens that came out to that meeting, and that is now being rescheduled because there really wasn't enough room in that hall. And there was a number of others that showed up at the Winnipeg public hearing in August and summer, because they're concerned. Obviously, they care about their community. So I think they should all be commended and all want to express their opinion and ask questions as well. So with me here today, I'm very delighted to have senior fellow Randal O'Toole join us. And Randal, a warm welcome to you.
Thank you.
Randal, you've written extensively on a myriad of topics. You're an economist with the Thoreau Institute, and you have seen, well, how many of these kinds of plans have you seen over the years in your career? I hesitate to ask.
Scores of them. I've looked at plans all over the United States and in many Canadian urban areas, particularly Vancouver, as well as Sydney, Auckland, various cities in urban areas in Australia and New Zealand, and the United Kingdom as well. So these plans are frequent, and they are almost all bad.
Wow. So you say all bad, not even a little bit good?
Not even a little bit good. The British Parliament passed what was called the Town and Country Planning Act in 1947. And because of that law, housing in Britain today is much worse than it was before the war. They've never recovered from the war thanks to that law. And that law has been used as the model for plans for places like Vancouver, which started writing its plan in 1964. And its 1964 plan has led directly to the problems Vancouver has today. And yet other people continue to make these mistakes.
Okay, so gosh, there you've heard it. There's a lot of problems with these plans from your perspective, Randal, and we're going to go into that in more detail. But we want to have obviously a thoughtful discussion, so we really do invite your perspective, your questions, and make sure you get on the chat. We'd love to relay your questions or points to our discussion. But I do want to share with you a clip from the Winnipeg Metropolitan Region, and this is their overview of this process.
50 is a regional plan for the Winnipeg Metropolitan Region. The Winnipeg Metropolitan Region, with its 18 municipalities, is the economic engine of the province, with 65% of the population and 66% of the GDP. Getting it right here is critical for our region's success and the success of our entire province. Plan 2050 was first contemplated in 1998 by then Mayor of Winnipeg, Susan Thompson, and its goal today is the same: to follow the lead of other successful regions and to align our planning and investment so we can increase our competitiveness and our economic prosperity. Most communities in the region have a good handle on their local planning and services, but often have little information on what's going on beside them. There is no long-term process to plan together and prioritize future critical infrastructure necessary to provide a quality of life that is second to none. By 2050, the Winnipeg Metropolitan Region is expected to grow to 1.1 million residents, requiring more housing and more jobs. A regional plan does not take away the need to plan locally, but seeks to leverage the strengths of all communities in the region as a whole to plan and invest in a bright future for the benefit of all. 4 policy lenses have been identified to guide the plan and help us stay focused on the future. These lenses consider future climate conditions, protection of our land, water, and natural resources, action for our region to remain economically competitive and ready for technological transformations, and honor our treaty relationship and carry on productive relationships with Indigenous governments and peoples. This is our region's first 30-year regional growth and servicing plan, a plan to ensure we all have what we need to be strong, prosperous, and sustainable. Your input is critical. To read the second draft of Plan 2050 and provide your comments and feedback, visit 20to50.ca today.
So there you go. There's an overview of the plan. Let's give our feedback. I encourage everybody to do it, to read it, if you have not had a chance. So, golly, Randal, how can you be against just planning like that? It all sounds so positive. I mean, it's working together. It's creating a more prosperous future. What's your problem, Randal?
Well, my problem is that they have lots of aspirations, and their plans will make those aspirations impossible to achieve. They talk about following the success of other urban areas, such as Vancouver, which is the most expensive housing market in all of North America. Toronto, the sixth most expensive housing market in all of North America. Meanwhile, Winnipeg is one of the most affordable housing markets. Toronto is the seventh most congested city in all of North America. Vancouver is 18th. Winnipeg is way up in the 50s. They're aspiring to be like cities that are expensive and congested, and that is not what I think most Winnipeg residents want to live in. They like the idea of living in a low density area that's not congested and is not expensive.
Okay, wow. So you're really challenging, like full on, this whole narrative that this kind of plan is the roadmap to creating a more livable and affordable city, especially as it references the model of so many other cities that just are the opposite. Is that your point?
One of the things that happens when you do this planning is you drive poor people out, and the only people who are left are fairly well off. And so you get high-end restaurants, you get art galleries, you get coffee shops that sell coffees for $5 or $10 a cup. And everybody who's left can afford that stuff. And so they say, oh, look, we've made this region so livable. Yeah, if you're a multimillionaire, it's livable, but it's not livable for the average person. Most families, their children move out when they grow up because they can't afford to live there. And if you don't already own a house, there's going to be increasing income inequality because the people who do own houses are going to get wealthy based on the value of their house going up. And the people who don't are going to end up renting for the rest of their lives and will never be able to build up any wealth at all.
Okay, so there's the warning. We've seen the future. If we just look at those other cities that you've mentioned, they really are train wrecks. Pardon the pun today as the railway strike starts, but they're train wrecks when it comes to affordability. I mean, the next generation really doesn't have hope. In fact, there was a survey that just came out last month in Vancouver saying half the people want to move out, and they are moving out. You can see that because it's just not affordable. In fact, so Winnipeg, though, conversely has a strength, which is it does have relatively good housing affordability. So your concern could also be looked at and say this plan could potentially derail that kind of strength.
It's not potentially. It will. If this plan is adopted, housing will get to be more expensive. The core of the plan is that most new people, and as the video said, the population of the region is supposed to increase by a third in the next couple of decades. Most of those new people will be housed in apartments or condominiums. The very last photograph in that show, that presentation, was a 4-story apartment building. That's what they want to see built. That's what they want people to be living in. The problem is, first of all, people don't want to live in 4-story apartment buildings. Most people, most Canadians want to live in single-family homes, and yet they want most new development to be apartments. The second problem is 4-story apartment buildings cost more than single-family homes because they require a lot of concrete to provide fire separations between floors. They require more steel to hold it all up. They require elevators. They require indoor lobbies and hallways that contribute to the cost of construction but don't contribute to living space. So all of these things make that kind of housing not a little more expensive, but a lot more expensive than single-family homes. And so they're talking about building fewer single-family homes, making it harder to build more, which will increase the cost of the homes that are left, and then building more expensive housing that people consider to be less desirable instead of building single-family homes.
All right. So again, you're challenging us right on, Randal, saying this plan is pushing density levels, a different form of housing that a lot of people, frankly, don't want to live in. Is that's
right?
Your take?
And today zoning codes generally have density maximums. They'll say something like no more than 10 houses per hectare, or no more than 5 houses per hectare, or something like that. And what they want to do is replace those with density minimums. that'll say at least 20 houses per hectare or at least 40 apartments per hectare, that you can't build less than that. And that's what they want to impose on the region so that they can house more people without using any more land that is already in the existing urban footprint.
Okay, so you would say, is that the fundamental flaw in your mind of this plan?
That is a major, yeah, I'd say that is the fundamental flaw. But the planners sincerely believe that what they call compact development is superior to the kind of development that most people want to live in. In fact, in a 1991 planning paper by Urban Land Institute researcher said there's a gap between the daily mode of living that people desire and the mode that city planners believe is appropriate. While most people want a house on a large lot and 3 cars in every garage, planners believe that that's expensive and it reduces quality of life. And so therefore, the paper, which, as I said, was 1991, proposes to use regional governments, which are unelected, unlike municipal governments, regional governments to force people to accept what the planners want rather than what the most people want. And the ironic thing is, of course, most planners live in single-family homes. They're not going to be caught living in an apartment or a condominium. They're going to live in a single-family home because that's what they want, just like everybody else. But they want other people, particularly new people. New people will be the one to end up living in apartments, to live in apartments rather than single-family homes.
Wow. So it sounds like they're really, I don't want to sound too rhetorical here, but redefining the Canadian dream. A lot of people would say, look, I'm excited about getting a home as I grow up. I still remember the first home I got. And gosh, it was really a fine home. And there was the vision then of starting a family, moving forward in your life and in every aspect of it. But, a lot of people, they're fine with living in an apartment. I did. But it doesn't mean you want to live there forever.
That's right. Most people think of an apartment as an intermediate living place. It's a place you live in until you get a down payment on a house or until you find the house you want to move into. Or it's a place you live in if you're only going to be in a community temporarily, like you're a student or a short-term worker or something like that. But it's not the kind of place that they want to live in for the rest of their lives. They want to live in a single-family home. They prefer to have a lot that they can have their children and pets play in. Maybe they have a garden, whatever. Everybody has different ideas of what to do with it. But single-family homes have more privacy. They have less crime because multi-family housing has lots of common areas. And you can't say to somebody in a common area, you don't belong here, you have to leave, because you don't know if they belong there or not. If you're living in an apartment that's got 400 housing units in it. But if somebody's on your lawn and they're not a member of your family or friends, you can say, you're on my private property, you have to leave. And that reduces crime. That significantly reduces crime. So there's a lot of benefits to living in neighborhoods with single-family homes. And of course, one of the big ones is it's more affordable, as I already said.
Okay, so that's a fascinating perspective. I'm talking with Randal O'Toole. He's a senior fellow at Frontier. His specialization is in economics and urban planning and transportation. So, Randal, I'm really curious as well, because you alluded to almost kind of like the planning philosophy that has evolved over decades. It's kind of like spread throughout the world as a kind of a way of thinking. Some would call it a virus, that somehow we don't just plan the basics, like where a roadway is going to go. We kind of load up on everything within the plan. Is that even realistic? Is that a good thing?
It's not a good thing. And the reason why is that urban planners don't really understand how cities work. Cities are really complicated. I mean, there's 750,000 people in the Winnipeg area, several million people in Vancouver and Toronto and Montreal. And it's really complicated, the fact that those people are spread out in hundreds of thousands of homes, and they have jobs in lots of different places. Most jobs aren't downtown anymore. They're spread out as well. And so people are trying to get from thousands of homes to thousands of different job places. You can't just build a light rail line and expect them all to go on that, because most people aren't going to live on it or work on it. You have to do both for the light rail to make sense to you. So cities are very complicated, and planners can't deal with that complexity. They don't understand how a city works. So what they usually do is they plan for the past instead of planning for the future. We hear things like the 15-minute city. Well, guess what? Canada had 15-minute cities in 1824, 200 years ago.
Yes.
That's when 15-minute cities existed. But then people developed horse cars and electric streetcars and automobiles. And all of those things made 15-minute cities go away. So now planners think, well, if we just force people to live in a city that look like cities look like in 1824, they'll stop driving.
Exactly. Yes.
The problem that people
so
started driving as soon as they got cars, and they've just redesigned their cities to fit their driving, and you can't just turn it around. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great insight. So we've heard a lot about 15-minute cities. Is this a kind of a 15-minute city plan, or is that a mischaracterization of what they're trying to do here?
I think that all of these ideas go together. Sometimes they call it smart growth. Sometimes you hear terms like complete streets. Sometimes you hear 15-minute cities. But they all go together. They're all calling for more compact development. You know, the idea of a 15-minute city is everything will be within walking distance of your home, but that means you have to live in a dense area with lots of businesses, coffee shops, grocery stores nearby, and so on.
And work there too.
And work there, or, you know, at very least being next to a transit stop, so you can take transit, spending 2 hours on transit to get to work. So the 15-minute cities is part of it. That isn't actually stated, the 15-minute cities term isn't stated in the Winnipeg plan, but the idea of compact development, the idea that most new housing should be built in dense areas, that's all part of the same idea, which is gets it backwards. It says if we just force people to live the way they did 100 years ago or 200 years ago, that they'll stop driving, and cars are evil, so therefore we're justified in doing that.
Okay, so there's a real divide here in terms of what's going on here, and you can hear the debate. You have a number of planners, and I don't mean to vilify them in any way. They're doing this out of good intentions. They believe that they're trying to create a better world. So we're going to, pack and stack those people into apartments. We're going to limit people's choice. We're going to create those minimum densities. We're going to introduce bicycle lanes that will push out the cars so that you maybe have to commute longer, but the car is bad. And it's a lot of this seems to be being driven by, well, they call it policy lenses. And the first one is build and plan for climate resilience. What is climate resilience? What does that mean, Randal?
Well, they're actually building a less resilient plan. Their idea of climate resilience, I think what they think is that if they force people to live in apartments, that'll use less energy. And if they force people to ride transit instead of driving, that'll use less energy and therefore emit fewer greenhouse gas emissions. The problem being that multifamily housing, especially 4 and 5 story housing, uses a lot more energy and therefore emits a lot more greenhouse gases to build than single family homes. And it uses more energy to operate. The heating and lighting of those multifamily dwellings is more per square foot than for a single family home. Partly because you're having to heat and light the lobbies and hallways and things like that. And also partly because often the costs of heating and lighting are shared. And so people don't feel like, flipping on a switch, well, somebody else is going to pay for some of that cost. So they're not saving energy, but they think they are. Nor are they even saving energy with transportation. Cars use more energy in congested traffic. When you pack more people into a denser area, traffic gets more congested. Yes, people may drive a little bit less in a denser area, but it's a lot more congested. And so they end up using more energy per capita in transportation in denser areas than in low density areas. So planners don't understand how cities work. They don't understand how energy works. They don't understand how greenhouse gases work. So they're relying on fads. They're doing what everybody else has done, what Vancouver has done, what Toronto has done. And it worked there, they say, even though Vancouver is the most unaffordable housing market in North America. Maybe that's their aspiration. Maybe they want to make Winnipeg single family homes unaffordable in order to force more people to live in apartments.
Does this remind you, and there's a question from the audience here, does this remind you, these high density models, of Eastern European and like Soviet style planning, where they would just regulate and build those apartments? And
actually, it does. There was a 1965 book called The Ideal Communist City. It was written by urban planners at the University of Moscow. And in 1971, some American urban planners wrote a book called Compact City, and they cited the ideal communist city in their bibliography. What the ideal communist city said was everybody should live in 5 to 10-story apartment buildings, and they should be very small apartments. They figured the average apartment should be about 400 square feet because that's all anybody really needs. They figured every family has an average of 2 adults and 2 children, so therefore 2 bedrooms, one for the adults and one for the children. That's all anybody needs. They're very prescriptive, and if you go to Eastern Europe or Russia, you'll find a lot of cities like this. And the real irony was I attended a conference once on sustainable transportation, and some researchers from the University of Stockholm said they had looked all over the world to try to find the most sustainable city in the world, and they decided it was a city in East Germany called Halle Neustadt. Why was it sustainable? Because it had lots of urban transit, and you weren't allowed to park a car in the city. You had to park it on the edge of town in a garage, and so people didn't own cars. I asked them for a copy of their paper, and I read the paper, and they said Halle Neustadt was the most sustainable city in the world until Germany reunified, and then everybody in East Germany went out and bought a car, and now they park their cars on the lawns in Halle Neustadt, and is no longer the most sustainable city in the world. So the key to sustainability is keeping people poor. That's the message I get. If we want to have a sustainable city, we have to force people to be poor. That's the wrong message.
Isn't that interesting? So it sounds like there's a lot of irony here when it comes to the intention of how plans really unfold here. So I did want to ask you, I've got some other questions here. Is this being driven? I see Prairie asking the question, does this come from the World Economic Forum? I mean, it sounds like a big conspiracy, but is it rather just that way of thinking? Is this coming from bodies like that, or is it from other places as well?
I would say it's coming primarily from university planning departments in Canada, in the United States. We don't have to rely on the United Nations or the World Economic Forum to provide kooks to lead our planners. The planners themselves are kooks. The schools they went to are run by kooks, and they are people who aren't willing to look at actual data. They just come up with a hypothesis and they run with it. I actually went to urban planning school for 1 term, and at the same time, I took a course in urban economics. And what we learned in urban economics is that when you make an area denser, you get people to drive a little bit less, but not much. And because there's a lot more cars per square mile or per square kilometer, you get a lot more congestion, you get a lot more pollution. In urban planning, they said, what happens when you make an area denser? Oh, people will drive less, and so therefore we'll have less congestion, we'll have less pollution. And I said, well, that's not what the data show. And they said, well, one of the professors in the class, everybody said, well, everybody's entitled to their opinion. And we went on to something else. And that's when I knew urban planning wasn't for me. Okay. This is what all these plans are based on. We just make an area dense enough and people will stop driving. I mean, what's the densest urban area in North America? Los Angeles. Nobody drives there, right?
Okay. So that is the irony. So what do you think? I'm having my engaging discussion with Randal O'Toole today about the Winnipeg Metropolitan Plan. It involves some 18 municipalities in that great region. And there's other communities as well hopping on board with this kind of, and you're calling it a fad, Randal. It's very interesting because when I look at these policy lenses, and I want to just remind people of them, the first one, as we said, was build and plan for climate resilience, and you've talked about that one. Number 2 is protect land and natural resources. And 3 would be reconciliation or mutual respect with First Nation communities. And then fourthly, economic and technological transformation. So, gosh, they even talk about that this kind of planning will help make this region more competitive. Is that, what do you gather by that point?
Well, let's go back to that second one, protect resources and land. You know, that might be an understandable goal if Manitoba were the size of Rhode Island or smaller. But even Rhode Island, 2/3 of Rhode Island is rural open space. And of course, Manitoba is about 99.5% rural open space. All the cities in Manitoba really don't amount to anything in the province. And Manitoba isn't, of course, the largest province in Canada. What's bigger? British Columbia. And yet they've done exactly the same thing. They've hemmed in Vancouver into a tiny corner of the province, and they won't let it out. And that's what's made housing so expensive. What's bigger than British Columbia? Ontario. And they're doing the same thing in Toronto. It's just like we can't see beyond the next home. And so we think, oh, we're running out of land. We better force everybody to live in apartments to protect this tiny, tiny province we live in called Manitoba or Ontario or British Columbia. Manitoba.
But wait a sec though, Randal, don't we have to protect agricultural farmland? I mean, obviously, we know the price of a house isn't so much the price of the house, it's the price of the land. And we're just trying to protect that agricultural farmland. Are you in favor of just gobbling that up and then we won't have any food?
Well, first of all, there's only about there's about 17 million acres of farmland in Manitoba. And there's only, what does all the cities add up to? They add up to, I have it here somewhere. Oh, I know, it's somewhere else. But anyway, all the cities add up to only about a million acres. So urban development is not a threat to farmland. It's actually, it would be easier to build cities on prime farmland and then take other agricultural land like rangeland or pasture land and turn it into cropland than it would be to force people to not allow people to build the kind of homes they want to build and make housing a lot more expensive. You know, we have a huge abundance of land in North America. And it's not just North America. Almost every country in the world, except for city-states like Singapore and Bangladesh, is the one really dense country that doesn't have a lot of room for rural land. But almost every other country, whether we're talking about the Netherlands or United Kingdom or New Zealand, have lots and lots of land, and urban areas only scratch the surface of how much land that is. So allowing people to live the way they want does not threaten farms. It does not threaten forests. It does not threaten rural open space. But
So we really need to keep this issue in perspective.
what we need to do is think about housing affordability first, because that's the first problem that results from these plans, is that housing becomes less affordable.
Okay.
And that's a much more important priority than protecting farmland.
Okay. So at Frontier, we issue with Wendell Cox, as you know, the demography report that talks about and defines housing affordability. It's reported around the world. And usually Wendell refers to housing affordability as being in the zone of 2 to 3 times the annual income of a family. How do you define housing affordability? Does that sound right to you?
Yes, if you sit down and crank out the numbers, you'll find that a house that costs about 3 times your income, you can get a mortgage on that house and pay it off in 10 years. If it costs 4 times your income, it's going to take 20 years. If it costs 5 times your income, it's going to take 30 years. And that's pretty much the limit of a mortgage. So anytime housing costs more than 5 times your income, it is by definition unaffordable. You can't get a house that's that expensive. And so if you look at Vancouver, where the median home is about 10 times more expensive than the median family income, that's an unaffordable market. Whereas in Winnipeg, it's about 3 times more expensive, which means you can buy a home, pay it off in 10 years. That's a very affordable market.
Yeah.
So looking at the affordability of a community and what these plans will do to it is important, and yet I don't see that mentioned anywhere in the Winnipeg 2050 plan.
Okay, so that again is another really a fundamental flaw, is that if we talk about this plan is going to create more affordability, then late on the line, that's a key issue, is housing affordability and how you define that. So this is an important issue, because ultimately, if you care about fellow Canadians, fellow citizens, you want to enable housing affordability. That's foundational to our lives, as we know. And if you don't take that seriously, like in so many jurisdictions, they've created a train wreck. That creates more poverty, doesn't it? Like, this creates more poverty, this way of thinking.
Well, it creates poverty and it creates income inequality. Income inequality was lowest in around 1970 in the United States and Canada, because at that time there were virtually no constraints on housing, and you could build housing wherever you wanted. Developers could come in and buy 1,000 acres of land and put 10,000 homes on them. And, the cost was very low. You could buy a brand new home for $10,000 or $20,000. Everything was very affordable. And then in the 1970s, communities all over the United States and Canada began adopting these kinds of regional plans. And that made housing in those communities really expensive. And as a result, income inequality started rising, and wealth inequality started rising as well. And there was a famous book by a man named Thomas Piketty called Capital, and he basically said that the value of capital goods was rising faster than the economy. It was growing faster than the economy. And so therefore, capitalists are getting richer faster than everybody else. Well, he looked at various kinds of capital goods like stocks and bonds and other things. And one of them was housing. And an economist from MIT named Matthew Ronley sat down and looked at Piketty's data set. And he said, there's only one kind of capital whose value is rising faster than the economy. It's not stocks. It's not bonds, it's housing. Mm-hmm. And it's rising faster because all these communities like San Jose and San Francisco and Vancouver have imposed these restrictions on new development and made land artificially expensive, which in turn made housing artificially expensive. So these plans are the reason why income inequality is such a big problem today. And we need to make sure Winnipeg doesn't pass a plan and see if we can get Vancouver and Toronto and other regions to abolish their plans so that income inequality can go back to where it should be.
Okay, so there you've heard it. That's quite a powerful take, Randal, on how these plans, although they're done with good intentions, can really have massive negative implications on people's lives. And this has been happening for years now. And, you reference that history. It's really quite informative.
I'm frankly, David, I'm a little tired of hearing people say, well, this is done with good intentions. I'm not sure they have good intentions. They want other people to have to live in ways that they themselves don't want to live. Okay. They want other people to ride transit when they drive to work. They want other people to live in apartments while they live in single-family homes. Portland has had plans like this being written since the 1970s. And the regional government there had a parking garage, and they said to the planners in their office, do you want to have free parking or do you want to have a free transit pass? It's one or the other. And they all said, we want free parking. We don't want a free transit pass, even though their building was right on a light rail line. So it's clear that these people have aspirations for other people to live in ways they don't want to live themselves.
Okay, so and what you're doing is
not good intention.
So that's okay. So point well taken. So some I would say are doing out of good intentions, but it also reflects a patronizing attitude. And I think this is what you're getting at, is that people would say, well, we are the good and the great, and we have the prerogative to shape how other people are going to live. Even though we may live in a single family house, we're going to prescribe to the next generation a lower standard of living, and where you're going to live in a tiny apartment and you're going to like it. Is that what you're getting at?
And they're doing it for the wrong reasons. They say, oh, this is going to reduce energy consumption. It's going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, when in fact, it'll do exactly the opposite. They say, oh, we're going to provide more open space, when open space is the most abundant resource North America has. It's not like it's a shortage. They're going to create artificial shortages of things that people want, and they create artificial surpluses of things that people don't really care about that much. And that, to me, is the definition of urban planning.
Okay, so does that mean a lot of urban planning is not, it's divorced from how cities work, as you've emphasized, including the world of economics, how the market works?
If you're a highway agency, you need to plan your highways. You need to plan where they're going to go, and when you decide to build one, you need to plan what it's going to look like and things like that. Mission-specific plans like that are just fine. But you give a regional agency power to plan other people's lives. You may own some land in the Winnipeg area, but this plan is saying we, the government, are going to decide what you get to do with your land. Or even worse, we're going to decide what you have to do with your land. You can't build a single family home on it. You have to build an apartment. With minimum density zoning, they have in some places zoned neighborhoods of single family homes for apartments. And if your house burns down, you're not allowed to rebuild it. You have to replace it with apartments. That's what's happened with these plans. Now, you don't find that in the Winnipeg plan, but these plans get to be more and more restrictive over time. Just as an example, they want to limit the ability to develop rural areas in order to stop the development of open space and farms and so on. So in Oregon, they passed a rule that said outside of cities, you had to have 40 acres to build a single house on your own land. And so people bought 40 acres and they built houses. So they changed it to 80 acres. And so people bought 80 acres and they built houses. So then they changed it so that you had to actually farm it for 5 years. So what people did is they bought 80 acres, they planted blueberries, which don't mature for 6 years. And after 5 years, they said, okay, we're blueberry farmers, so now we get to build our house. And this is what an exact quote from the planning advocates. They said, my God, doctors and lawyers are living in rural areas. We need to put a stop to this. So they made it even more restrictive. They said you had to earn $80,000 a year from farming your land for 2 of the last 3 years before you could get a permit to build a house. Only 1 out of 6 Oregon farmers actually earn $80,000 a year. So if they didn't already have houses on their land when this rule was passed, they wouldn't have been able to farm, because it's really hard to farm if you don't have a house near your farm. So
this is
they get
this
more
is
and more
insane.
restrictive all the time.
Well, I did also want to point out another policy lens that they're looking at, and I want to ask this as a question to you and the audience as well. But it's fascinating because in this planning document, it goes to great lengths and pains to point out that all the land in the area is on Aboriginal land. There's an Aboriginal land acknowledgement. And what I found fascinating is in Manitoba, we know that one of the issues that makes the province challenge when it comes to its competitiveness is a number of things, including high personal taxes. And there's a business tax that if you hire more employees, you pay even more tax. So it's a disincentive to grow your business there. And that's why a lot of businesses have moved out of that great province. But what's fascinating now is the introduction of the Aboriginal land acknowledgement. So my question would be, why would that not be addressed? Does that not create a significant point of confusion or uncertainty? Like, why would I have a business in that jurisdiction if there's, in a sense, a veto that I'm giving to another group that could say, well, no, we disagree with this, and we're going to, you can't do that because that's actually our land in some measure.
Look, there's no doubt that both the United States and Canada severely mistreated First Nations people. And we should do something to reverse that, to help those people. But the best way we can help people is to make everyone wealthier, to make everyone be able to own land, own a home, use that ownership to borrow money, to start a small business, to send their kids to college, to do all the things that are part of the Canadian dream. And if we just say, we're going to use Aboriginal rights to shut down development, that doesn't make anybody wealthier. It makes people poorer. And that's exactly the opposite of what we should be doing.
Okay, so I think that's a very good point. Are we really going to be creating the opposite goal? We should be striving for prosperity for everybody, including our Canadians of Aboriginal background. I mean, that's obvious, but this plan could actually end up having a boomerang. It sounds like that's the consistent theme, isn't it, Randal, that you keep emphasizing, is that a lot of these plans will end up making life worse for everybody, potentially.
Yeah, and it's not potentially. We know that every city in the United States that has drawn an urban growth boundary to try to stop sprawl has become a lot more expensive. And many other urban areas are very affordable because they didn't do that. There's a one-to-one correspondence between passing a plan like this and becoming unaffordable. So if this plan passes, I guarantee you housing prices are going to start growing faster than incomes in Winnipeg, and they won't stop because they'll just make the plans more restrictive over time, and so they'll just make the housing prices rise faster.
All right. I do have a question from the audience. What do you think about increasing the number of bicycle lanes?
I'm an active cyclist, and I can understand why people are made nervous by bicycling in traffic. And so if you have places to build exclusive bike and pedestrian lanes, I think that would be great. If you don't, if you take an arterial or a collector street, a busy street, in other words, a street where you have lots of automobiles and lots of stoplights, and you take away lanes from cars and give them to bicycles, you're not going to increase cycling that much. and you're not even going to increase bicycle safety that much, because what you're doing is you're protecting bicyclists from being hit from behind. And yet that's a very rare kind of accident. Most bicycle accidents take place at intersections. Guess where the bike lanes disappear? At the intersections. So what you're doing is you're making travel more congested for everybody else to help a handful of cyclists and make them think they're safe when you're actually not increasing safety at all. Instead, what you should do is find a parallel street that's not a busy street, but is parallel to your arterial street, and designate this parallel street as a bicycle boulevard. You minimize the number of stop signs. You provide safe crossing systems when the bicycles reach a busy street. That might mean making it easy for bicycles to trip a wire sensor that understands that there's a bicycle there and then changes the lights for the cross traffic, whatever. And a bicycle boulevard is a much better way. It's much safer for the cyclists, and it doesn't take away the capacity of the arterials and collectors to move motor vehicles. So I like that system much better, not bike lanes made out of arterials and collectors.
Okay. I think that sounds like a very common sense approach to the issue of bicycle lanes. I just think, again, it's almost become a fad in so many cities, no less in Canada, where it's a relatively cold climate. And, I have yet to see many traffic counts being done on bicycle lanes in this country. I just anecdotally, I travel all over these cities and I see them, and it's amazing how few people even use them. Now, and then it just pushes out the car. Is that really the agenda behind a lot of these bicycle lanes on busy arterial roads? I mean, it almost seems insane to me.
I think you're right. I think they're claiming to be bicycle friendly, but they're really automobile hostile. That's their real goal, is to create a hostile environment for automobiles. And the bicyclists end up supporting these plans, even though they get harmed by it. Cities in the United States, we have excellent data in the United States. We have excellent data for how many lanes of traffic there are. We have excellent data for traffic accidents, bicycle fatalities, and everything else. Canada doesn't keep that data, so I can't cite the data for Canada. But cities in the United States that have adopted plans like these have seen bicycle fatalities go up, not down. So you put in bike lanes, you encourage people to bicycle, so you get more people cycling. It's not a lot more. It's not, maybe it's twice as much as you had, but twice nothing is still nothing, right? But that means there are more people encountering cars at intersections. That means there's more intersection-related bicycle fatalities.
Indeed.
So
but here's a very important point. I want a
data-driven process that says we're going to do something that the data show is going to make it safer for bicyclists. And to me, what the data show is that exclusive bike lanes or bicycle boulevards are safe, and exclusive bike paths and bicycle boulevards are safe, and bike lanes on arterials and collectors are not. And that's what we need to avoid, and yet that's what they're doing.
Okay, so, but that's a very good plan a very good challenge to these types of plans is, wait a sec, where is your existing data on existing dedicated bicycle lanes versus on arterial roads? And we see a lot of data in the United States, as you said, but there's very little, if any, in Canada, which is pretty pathetic. We're spending tens of millions of dollars on these kinds of bicycle lanes and really creating, as you say, a hostile environment for people who use automobiles to commute, around these cities. So commuting times are very important, aren't they, for the functioning of a city, Randal?
Well, yes, they are. And data show that if you can speed up traffic, that you get higher incomes, because people can reach jobs that will pay them more, where they can be more productive. Employers have access to a wider range of more people, and therefore they can hire people who are more suited for each job. And you get a more productive workforce, you get higher incomes. and all the benefits that come from that. You also get access to better housing. You get access to lower cost consumer goods. The people stuck in the apartments might be able to walk to a high cost, low, limited selection grocery store, but the people who live in a single family home can get in their car and drive, and within a few minutes go to any of 3 or 4 different major supermarkets that are competing fiercely based on both price and selection for your business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, indeed. So helping people commute effectively across their community is very important. And I think it goes back to your point, and others have made this. In fact, I just had a discussion with Alain Berthaud, the former chief urban planner for the World Bank, emphasizing that these commuting times are critical. Anything more than a half an hour really undermines the ability of a community to work as a labor market. People go to communities not just to live, but to find a job. And conversely, employers go to a community to find employees. So if you make it very difficult to commute, then it really undermines people's ability to get their job and the economy, as you say, and their quality of life.
No, we had this debate 50 years ago. 50 years ago, cities in North America were terribly polluted by automobile fumes. And we tried 2 different ways of solving this problem. One was to make automobiles cleaner with catalytic converters and other things that reduce the amount of pollution. The other was to try to get people out of their cars and onto mass transit or onto bicycles. And one of the ways we tried to get people out of their cars was many cities decided we're going to stop building new roads. And then it'll get more congested and people will be frustrated by the congestion and they'll get out of their car and they'll take transit. Mm-hmm. Well, guess what? Our air is clean now. Virtually every city in North America, at least the United States and Canada, has very clean air. We don't have the problems we did 50 years ago. And all of that came from making cars cleaner. None of it came from making cities more congested. In fact, making cities more congested has worked against it because more congested traffic means you burn more fuel, which means you cause more pollution. So one expert says making cars cleaner is responsible for 110% of the reduction in air pollution, and trying to get people out of their cars resulted in a 10% increase in air pollution. So if we want to reduce global climate change, if we want to save energy, don't try to change people's lifestyles. Just try to change the tools they are using, such as automobiles or their houses, and make them more energy efficient, make them cleaner, and make them safer.
All right. So, we have had quite a far-reaching discussion here, and I really appreciate the audience's questions and engagement here. So as we look at this plan, do you have any advice for citizens as they look at this? Because it's almost overwhelming as you look at this kind of planning process and say, gosh, how is it going to impact me? And what should I do about this? Because, a lot of the parties get up in these meetings, they position themselves as experts and beyond question in some measure. I know that's, again, maybe not their intention, but it sure does come across a kind of this patronizing attitude that, how dare you question this plan? So do you have any advice for a citizen in this process?
Well, there was a famous architecture critic named Jane Jacobs who wrote a book called The Death and Life of Great American Cities. And she was extremely critical of the urban planning profession. And she noted that planners were, even then in the 1960s, were beginning to write regional plans. And she said, a region is an area safely larger than the last one to whose problems we found no solution. And so what that says to me is, don't try to make this regional plan better, just kill it. Instead, let the cities, let the municipalities write their own plans. Winnipeg should let individual neighborhoods write their own plans and don't have a regional plan. I'm not even sure Winnipeg should have a city plan. Winnipeg is too big for people to understand, and so it needs to be broken down even more into individual neighborhoods and let them all write their own plans.
Interesting. All right. So there you've heard it from Randal O'Toole. Kill the plan, for good reason. So you know this is something that you're not going to hear very frequently. It's a pretty powerful point here. So Randal, I do have a question. Do you anticipate the Winnipeg Metropolitan Regional Plan attempting to stop the other smaller regional municipalities from discussing their own Citizens Plans 2050 to opt out as per the Premier's plans later this year? I'm not sure if I totally gather that, but I guess
they're going to do whatever they can to twist the arms, even if the provincial government allows an opt-out. The regional agency is going to do whatever it can to twist the arms of local municipalities and force them to come in. One way they might do that is if they have any power of the purse. If they decide, where are transportation dollars in the region going to go? Then they'll say, okay, local municipality, you don't want to be a part of the plan? Okay, well then we won't give you any transportation dollars. We won't give you any affordable housing dollars. We won't give you any kind of support, so you'll have to raise it all yourself. Whereas if you join us, we'll give you all this support, but that means you'll have to meet our targets of building all kinds of high density housing and turning individual traffic lanes into bike lanes and so on and so forth.
So as you've seen elsewhere, and I have as well, the higher authority, namely the province of Manitoba, will likely use a combination of, dare I say, carrots and sticks to incentivize the municipalities to play along with this kind of planning process.
Now, you only have to look at Vancouver, which was written a plan in 1964, then one in the 70s, one in the 80s, and so on and so forth. They'd write a new plan about every 10 years. Every plan was stricter than the previous plans. Every plan made housing a lot more expensive than it was before. Every plan made traffic a lot more congested than it was before. And so you look at this Winnipeg plan and compare it to Vancouver's current plan, and the Winnipeg plan doesn't look all that bad. But if you compare it to Vancouver's 1964 plan, they look a lot alike. So you can project ahead a couple of decades, and if Winnipeg passes this plan now, a couple of decades from now, it's going to look a lot more like Vancouver's plan does today.
Okay, so there's the foreshadow, the warning. And just to be clear, so your vision, if I was to summarize it, if I've known you for a number of years, Randal, is that you'd emphasize enabling, empowering people to choose how they're going to live, to encourage decentralization when it comes to municipal power and authority as close to the people as possible, an emphasis on property rights. Like if somebody's got all this control over your land, you don't really own your land anymore. Is that kind of the core of a lot of things that you're saying?
That's right. And there's an important property right that people don't think about very much. Back in the 19th century, urban home ownership rates were really low, like around 15%. 85% of urbanites did not own their own home in North America. And why was that? Because if they would buy a home, they put up a lot of money to buy that home, they had no guarantee that their next door neighbor wasn't going to put in a gravel pit or a brickyard or, a pig farm or, a high density apartment. They had no idea what was going to go in next door. Developers figured this out. And about 1890, developers started putting in protective covenants that said, you can buy a lot in our development, but you can only put in a house. You can't put in an apartment. You can't put in a brickyard. You can only put in a house. So the developers were doing some planning, and what they found was it didn't increase the cost. I mean, they'd hire an attorney and it cost a few $100s, and they'd spread that out among 100 homes. It didn't increase the cost of the homes or the lots much, but it made the lot sell a lot faster because people had this assurance, and home ownership rates just started shooting upwards because people knew that if they bought a home in a place that had protective covenants, they were giving up a property right, but they were saying, I want the right to live in a neighborhood of single-family homes, like my home. And I'm willing to give up the right to build my lot to a higher density as long as I know my neighbors are giving up that right too. That's a property right too. Well, then somebody said, well, what do we do about existing neighborhoods of single-family homes? We can't go door to door and get everybody to sign an agreement to do this, because one person will hold out and make everybody else pay millions of dollars, because they want to do something else, or they're just cantankerous or whatever. So they came up with the idea of zoning, single-family zoning. And single-family zoning was a direct imitation of these covenants that property developers were imposing. Well, today, most new developments come with covenants, but they also often are single-family zoned. And so the planners that are planning these compact development plans, such as the Winnipeg plan or the Vancouver plan, say, oh, the reason why housing is so expensive is because those evil single-family homeowners won't let us build apartments on their land or on their next-door neighbor's land. And if only we could get them to do that, that housing would be more affordable. Well, that's not true. We know that if you build high-density apartments, those apartments are less affordable, not more affordable than single-family homes. So replacing a single-family home with less affordable housing doesn't make housing more affordable. But this is their argument. They call it YIMBYism, yes, in my backyard. But they really mean is yes, in somebody else's backyard. We want to see higher densities because, of course, the urban planners, the architects who came up with these ideas, they live in areas with protective covenants, many of them, and so they don't have to worry about this happening in their neighborhood.
Well, you've outlined very well today, Randal, a lot of the challenges in a very critical way, perhaps an insight that a lot of people would not hear of. But I think what you're also doing is saying these plans are very real. They have big impacts on people, and they really have the high risk of making our lives less affordable, less livable. So I want to thank you very much for joining our discussion today, and certainly the audience as well, for this really quite insightful discussion.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Randal. And thank you again to the audience for joining us today. We'll be having a similar discussion next week. We'll be talking about the story of Venezuela, how Venezuela, its incredible history as a nation, and where it's at today as it struggles and it kind of is on the edge of civil war. So be sure to join us for that discussion next Thursday. And thank you for your involvement, and thanks for sharing this kind of recording with a broader audience, because these are very important issues. Thank you.